Namaste to all of you. So the irony of speaking last at the panel discussion is that your fellow speakers, and especially when the fellow speakers are so scholarly and erudite, who shared their perspective, insights with a very vibrant manner, and to be at the last, you don't have to say anything because they all taken everything. My fellow panelists also spoke about two challenges post-lunch. And that's the third challenge of a panelist who comes at the last at this stage. So I'll try and then the last speaker or last panelist would say, I'll share a different perspective. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, but are we providing enough to those who have too little. That means diversity in my mind. When India is thriving at a Q1 GDP rate of 7.8%, in so-called, because other countries are calling India as a so-called developing countries. And these numbers are really fascinating because all the so-called developed countries are not there in the top 10 list of this Q1 ranking of the GDP. So whenever we are talking about diversity, equity and inclusion, that contains a paradox. The reason I said it's a paradox because there is a difference and very robust line between equity and equality. So whenever you are talking about DEI, so both comes into the picture, whether the organization, and which is the theme of this conference, how to harness the future enterprises. And I've heard a global kind of a quantum growth. I've heard about quantum computing, but now how we can thrive for the quantum growth and create the global leaders. What my fellow speaker talked about, that how the global organizations have been leading by the Indian origin CEOs. Very interestingly, whenever we talk about this topic, and we are talking about the diversity as a business, so first we really need to understand what do we really mean by business. According to me, I'm not very fond of using the fancy definitions comes from the Western part of the world. But if you ask, what do you mean by business? So it simply means when more number of people are thriving for the less number of resources. And when you are there, less diversity in the resources, and that completely talks about whether the organization is really diverse or not. So there was an interesting study I would like to share one anecdote of a Fortune 500 companies. We are talking about creating the global leadership. So there was very interesting study happened of all Fortune 500 companies, because if you are aware, the first list of the Fortune 500 companies got published in 1955. And if you go through the last list, which got published in 2023, and we are the 23rd National Management Summit in 2023. Interestingly, what they carved out is more than 11,000 companies across the world went into that list since 1995 and got out from that list. But the more curiosity could be built by knowing the fact that only 76 companies got sustained into that list since 1955. They dwelled out into the research and identified what were the reasons behind those sustainable positioning within the Fortune 500 list since 1955. And they came out with a conclusion that those companies who were better at their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices could sustain themselves in those lists. So when we are technically passing through a very unprecedented time, and the time is such, and I could not refrain to quote, there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. So many things are happening at the same time, untiringly, and India especially is creating the entire benchmark in the global south, and we have just witnessed the legacy of B20 and G20 and given the presidency to Brazil. If I were to talk about some of the practices of diversity, equity and inclusion at SRK, and my fellow speaker already spoke about the diversity based on the gender, the caste, the religion. We also learned about the Mahabharata story, how it was there even during those times. We at SRK, which is world's largest diamond manufacturing and export company, having 6,000 employees globally, and the core is into the manufacturing and export of diamonds. You'd be surprised to know that the average education of all 6,000 employees is less than primary. At the same time, the conflicting and the contradicting part is, with this education, the average salary of the 6,000 employees is more than 45,000 per month. Had it been, they would have not engaged into the diamond manufacturing industry. You can imagine a kind of a work they would have done that, not above the labor class with that education. So, whenever we are talking about diversity, we have to also appreciate that how you are providing a clear roadmap of a succession planning, career planning, and to progress within the, it's completely understandable that organization has to grow, but at the same time, are we providing enough progress to our employees or not? Because we are truly there at the intersection where the technology, digitalization, especially post-COVID era, is disrupting the entire business. So I keep on saying the data is actually killing the processes and technology is disrupting the value chains. So where the time is such interesting to be diverse within the organization, for our employees, for stakeholders, because we can't talk only about our internal stakeholders who are the employees of the company, but we have to care about the external stakeholders of the company. And that is quite easily said than done, but only those organizations would be able to thrive and survive within the space of this DEI and when the world is changing so fast. And whenever we are talking about that thing, and my fellow speaker also spoke about the culture, that who is in charge of the culture, who can actually decide how the culture of the organization should be. Generally, it's being said that whenever anything goes wrong, always HR department is like there at the blame game, that it's a responsibility of an HR to drive the culture within the organization. But to my mind, it's coming from top. It's your leadership decides how a culture should be derived within the organization. It starts from the top. Whatever they do, because when any leader inspires you to do more, act more, dream more, desire more, and do fascination within the portfolio, then and then it gets cascaded into the bottom line and to the bottom line hierarchy of the organization and even the employees. So until unless they support in nurturing the culture of care, DEI within the organization, it's quite ambitious to only for HR to do that wonder within the organization. The last thing which I would like to talk about is how a company can create that roadmap where you can actually be really pertinent about your particular role. You are empowered to do particular things, and you are also kind of consider yourself not as an employee of the organization, but as you are one of the owners of the organization. And the sense of ownership, I'm not talking about having the shares of the company, but having the sense of belongingness that wherever I'm working for this organization, and this is my organization. Then the spirit could be roped out within the employees if the company's leadership is committed enough for this thing. And at the same time, when we are talking about DEI, we also have to have a diversity within the organization. So DEI is not only related to all those nuances which have been deliberated so far, but are we also paying enough attention to the ESG part, our environment, our social, and the governance? So are we having enough DEI nuances in this ESG parameter? That is also making a buzz kind of a practice within the organization. So I would conclude my sentence and conclude my talk, and would be able to get the offline discussion, because I think we are running short of time and won't stretch my remarks. So thank you very much for hearing me so peacefully. And once again, thank you very much for having me here. Yeah.
I would like to announce the Human Resource Category Award. The top rankers Excellence Award for HR Role Model goes to Shri Nirav Mandir, Chief Human Capital Officer. Congratulations, sir. I would request Mr. Vijay Rai and Mr. VSK Sood to please come upon the stage and give the award to sir. Thank you all.